at a seminary or?
Just churches.
Okay.
Anytime a church is willing to let me in the door.
Awesome. Good
Is that often?
No.
What do? You have your own like PowerPoints and slides?
Yeah. I do kind of a modified tactics training that I've put on a number of times, and we do a little atheist role play to kick things off, and then we go into tactics a little bit and break that down over a couple of weeks.
Oh, that's pretty cool. What are your main points that you teach on?
How to have gracious conversations with people, and
but you do give an offensive apologetic, right?
Yeah, we give a few, but the main thing is how to have these conversations, especially for somebody that's thrown in with no idea what to do. So we cover arguments as we kind of go through the thing. So it's kind of a little combo training.
Nice.
Right on.
Good evening, Ringo Cat. Welcome to the backstage. There you are.
There you go. Yeah, you're in the backstage.
So yeah, just so you know, Ringo, looks like Danny was a little scared to be grilled.
I wouldn't say
He's
that.
running a little late. I'm just joking. Come on.
Yeah, right, Dale. We know you're serious.
Where did you, David Russell? Where did you meet Danny? Like, how did this show get arranged? I guess just
I got a hold of him through Twitter and Facebook. So.
Oh, okay. You've never interacted with him or anything else?
Yes, he was on Pora.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got the prior relationship going. Awesome. Hopefully he knew it was tonight.
Yeah. I mean, it's on the it's on the thumbnail there.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, hopefully it wasn't like maybe like he misunderstood. He thought it was for a different date or something on his end. Hello to the Vulture. How's it going? Nice to see you here. All right. Hey there, Ray. Nice to see you. We're just waiting for Danny to show up. So yeah, sorry. That's why we're kind of rambling on here with nothing to say. But all right. Seeing Ringo Cat, he's.
Yeah, I don't believe you don't have plenty of things to say.
I am desperate to. I'm just trying to keep people entertained while we're waiting. But yeah, Ringo. He says there's a backstage pass. Yep. Welcome to the backstage. All right, cool. He's just chilling.
All right, we might just have to wing this, gentlemen.
Cool.
My specialty.
Trade 2 hamburgers for dinner. Interesting.
Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Faith Unaltered. I'm your host, David Russell, and I'm joined here with my two co-hosts, Dale Glover and Caleb Johnson of Questioning Christianity. And Dale is of Real Seekers Ministry. Yes, how are you guys doing today?
Good, good. Happy to be here to grill an atheist without the atheist.
Right on, Caleb.
Doing real good.
Right on, right on. You see how our family's growing, guys. It's just such a beautiful thing. And we just hit the 1,000 subscriber mark. Thank you all for liking, subscribing, and sharing. It's awesome. But if you haven't, keep going, because we always love more subscribers. So yeah, we just hit that 1,000 mark, and yeah, it feels great.
Awesome.
What have you guys been up to?
For me, on my end, so I'm excited because last night I just had my first Bible study, teaching like a Bible study, and I'm doing it on the evidence for the resurrection and stuff like that. And we were kind of looking specifically, what's the nature of the resurrection body? Is it a physical or is it just a spiritual resurrection, like Dale Allison believes and stuff? So yeah, that went well. I think it was new for them. They're not into apologetics, but yeah, I think they found it interesting and stuff. So that was good.
Right on, Caleb.
Yeah,
What's you up to, man?
I've been having weekly conversations with some new LDS friends. So that's been fun. We're going through Joseph Smith's history a little bit.
Right on. What strikes you particularly in those type of conversations? How do you go about your witness there?
Yeah, the hardest thing having conversations with either LDS missionaries or Jehovah's Witness missionaries, the biggest challenge is often the language, because we use the same words, salvation, atonement, faith, and yet these things mean something completely different to them in their religion versus what Orthodox Christianity would say these things mean definition-wise. So you talk a lot past each other. So it's a lot of going back to basics and figuring out definitions.
That's wild. That's wild. I noticed that too. Whenever I was talking to him as well, and Jehovah's Witnesses, there's a lot of speaking past each other. But yeah, guys. Well, we had a great episode for you guys tonight, but it seems like our guest hasn't showed yet, so we're just kind of waiting for him to pop on here. But before we do that, I was just gonna lay out some things for you guys as well. What are some of the hardest questions that you've had to answer when it comes to non-belief? Dale?
So hardest questions for me as
Yeah.
a Christian to have to answer.
Yeah.
I think that I think kind of going based on like Tyler Vela, it's people, atheists, who they say, well, look, I don't have this belief, or the Holy Spirit's never spoken to me, or like unanswered prayers. For a lot of them, that's a really big issue for them, and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's one of the main objections I get. It's not necessarily an intellectual thing. It's this more emotional, dealing with their emotions, that they feel abandoned or God's not hearing or listening to them and stuff.
Right on. Caleb, what do you think?
Yeah, my answer kind of ties in with Dale's there. The problem of evil is a big one, but it's not necessarily that intellectual problem of evil. It's the emotional problem of evil. We've all had experiences with real evil, either close to us or right in our backyard. And so a lot of times when people are asking questions about why evil exists, it's a very personal thing because it's so close to home for them that you got to separate the intellectual from the emotional, and doing that in conversations with somebody is really challenging.
No, I hear you. I agree. I think most of these deconversions and stuff come with, I wasn't treated right, either by the church or some sort of emotional response to something that they've been through, that usually triggers it. And I don't know why that sometimes that evacuates the intellectual side of it all, but it does, and it's crazy to me. Um, but I wanted to go and ask this question to Danny tonight, and this is what I was going to ask. Danny had um, a live where he was asking, "Does God have free will?" So I'll let you guys play with that for just a second. Do you believe God has free will? How would you answer that?
Me, for, me first.
Dale, just jump in, man.
Okay. No, I'm just being polite to Caleb. Yeah, so I definitely believe that God is a free will agent, and in a libertarian sense. When I first became a Christian in 2018, I did get kind of tripped up by like, okay, well, if he's determined, is he maybe determined by his nature or something? So like, it's impossible for him, logically impossible for him to sin, for example. But I now see that that is a mistake. I do think it's logically possible for God to sin. God can logically tell a lie or something, but I now just say it's metaphysically impossible for God to sin. There's no, feasible world where God sins, even if there's a logically possible one where he has the power to lie or to beat someone up or something like that. So yeah.
So you would kind of stray from the nature argument then.
Well,
It's like the way because the way I see it is like, okay, so I have I have free will, right? But I don't have the free will to turn into a dog, right? So I really can't violate my nature. You know what I mean? To that degree. And like I mean, and what is free will at that point? What is being a free moral agent um, you know, in entail? Is it to do anything versus everything, right? And I think God can do everything. I don't think he can just do anything. So I would kind of like categorize it in one of those logical impossibility categories.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake, right? Like I think it's inherent to any free will agent that that's inherent. They can do if us doing some kind of sin is a logically possible action for us. It's logically possible for God as a free will agent, but it is his nature. I do. It's because of his nature that makes it infeasible for God to ever sin. So it's metaphysically impossible, not logically impossible.
So what do you mean by so yeah, you're just making a distinction between the feasibility and the logic of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I got you. Caleb?
Just a quick little clarification here on the free will part. What I'm trying to say, why it's infeasible or metaphysically impossible for God to lie, it's not because his nature determines him not to lie, but his nature plays an influencing role. Obviously, his morally perfect nature, in light of that, God will never freely choose to will to sin. Right? He'll never choose to sin. Um, he'll never use his free will to take that action, even though it's logically possible. He has the power to sin in. There are logically possible worlds grounded in God's causal potential and power, whereby he can lie and stuff like that. But he will never choose to sin, in light of the fact that he has a morally perfect nature, and because of that influence, it's just a God, divine, morally perfect being will never choose to sin, even if it's logically possible for them to do that. And that's what makes it metaphysically impossible or infeasible. There's no, metaphysical possible world where God actually chooses to sin. That's what I was trying to say there.
That's interesting. I had a conversation with somebody this week, and it really struck me how we use that word God's will, that phrase, so much, but it's something that helps us relate to God more than the other way around, because even to have a will to desire something for the future has a temporal aspect to it. So in that aspect, does God's will get accomplished? Of course, but is it will in the sense that we think of it? I'm not so sure that it is, because if he knows how things can play out, if he has that middle knowledge of all possible outcomes, then is it really will, or is it more his nature that drives these things. So I've had some interesting discussions about that this week. Surprised it came up here too.
Wild. Dale, what did you think about Caleb's response?
Yeah, so I do think I disagree with it. Like, obviously, I've been saying, like, yeah, I've come to this conclusion. Yeah, I would definitely say it's logically possible for God to sin. He has the power to do. I didn't understand your distinction between everything and anything. Like that just sounds synonymous to me. Like,
No. Well, we would say, or I would say that there are things that are logically impossible. Right. So like a squared circle or a married bachelor, right? I would say God's sinning is like that. He can't sin because his nature is absolute good. He's the standard of goodness. So that's how I would attack it. I think it would be logically impossible for God to sin because of his very nature. So that's kind of what I mean. God can do everything, which is logically possible. He just can't do anything.
gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. We are kind of saying the same thing, but like it's just I'm making this distinction because of his nature. That just makes it metaphysically or broadly logically impossible. So in that sense, it's not exactly like the square circle because that's logically impossible, right? There isn't a single world, but we are at the end of the day, we are both agreeing that in one way or another, it is impossible for God to sin.
Yeah. So why wouldn't you think it's logically impossible though? If something's like pure good, why couldn't it be logically impossible, like a squared circle or a married bachelor?
Well, because it is logically possible for a good person or free will agent to sin. There's a logically possible world where no contradiction is entailed, where God can tell a lie or something like that. I don't see a contradiction in that. At least at the level of logical possibility, right?
Well, yeah, and that's where probably I would disagree is because I think that I mean it depends on I guess what you're operating on as far as your definition of purely good, and perfection and stuff like that. So I would that would have to be defined, I think, before we could really continue on that line of thought. Caleb?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Because if God is the supreme being, the most supreme being, and is all good, then that sin immediately disqualifies him from being God. He would no longer exist as God, I don't think, if he were to sin.
Okay.
And then like how I said too, Dale, I'm still a moral agent. I think I'm a free moral agent that has free will, right? So I can do those things that are logically within. I can exercise that free will within the bounds logically of what I can do, basically. And then, but I can't do something like change my nature. I can't violate who I am because it would make me not me anymore, right? And then who knows what all weirdness that would entail.
I mean, we can change our nature, right? Like Adam and Eve changed their nature. They didn't have a sin nature, and they freely chose to sin, and they changed their nature. They acquired a sinful nature. So it is possible to change your natures.
See, that's where we're mixing definitions there on nature. I'm talking about they didn't stop being human. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
That's what I'm using that in the sense of. So, but anyways, Caleb Jackson is here with us, the other Caleb, as we say. What's going on, brother?
Pretty good. Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks. I just got out of some stuff, so happy to be here now.
Yeah, well, we keep waiting for Danny, but I don't know if he's going to end up showing. I don't know if
did he agree to this?
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing, just one last thing on the last thing, and then I'll shut up about it. But one thing?
No, Dale, that time has passed. We're talking to Caleb right now. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
I just wanted to say, like, my uncomfortableness is just, I don't want to say that God's nature determines God. Then he's not free. We can't say that he's free. You have to choose one or the other, kind of thing. So that's the reason why I'm hesitant.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, I understand that, but like, what is free will then at that point? I mean, like I said, I still have the ability to do whatever's logically possible within the realm of what I can do, what I'm capable of, right? So I mean, I'm still free. It just depends on what you're using as the boundary of what freedom really is. Like, how can Paul be free in prison, type of thing, like he says, I think, in Ephesians. But yeah, that's kind of like where I was coming from. Yeah.
All right, cool.
But yeah, so Caleb, yeah, Danny's not here yet. I don't know if he thought it was Saturday or what, but usually he shows up, so I'm not.
So just kind of winging it right now.
We are winging it. We are just asking questions. I started off with, does God have free will? Question that I was going to ask Danny, and stuff like that. So how was the week, bud?
I think that God has free will. So I didn't know if we were moving past that or if that's
no. You can answer it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't hear all of Dale's answer, but I take I take an indeterministic model of free will, but I'm okay with like proximate compatibilism or sorted compatibilism, but I'm not a full determinist. I do think that there's some indeterminacy, right? So, but I don't think that the principle of alternative possibilities is necessary for every action to be free, from what I can tell.
Right on. So what have you been working on, Caleb?
I mean, there's not much that it's been fine. It's been really busy with work. So not that much to update. So I got to be on the news for like 2 seconds because they were doing one of our committees for work and I was in the background. So there's that. But yeah, no, it's
have your autograph.
You can have it in the book, and you can get a whole nickel for it.
Nice
value. Yeah.
Right on. Well, if you hadn't noticed, we have hit that 1,000 subscriber mark, which I'm
congratulations.
Thank you, sir. We are moving along. So yeah, man, I'm really excited about that. And like I was telling the guys, it's just feels like a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
But yeah. So do you have what did you have prepared tonight that you're gonna ask?
I did not have anything prepared, to be honest. I just got done eating, and I was just gonna. Well, that's why in Clubhouse when I interact, usually it's just winging it. Typically, there's not a set conversation. So
right.
Yeah, that's typically how it goes. How's other Caleb doing?
Doing good, hanging in there.
It's good.
Right
like
on.
You've been busy with work.
What was that?
Like you've been busy with work.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
All right, so next question. Hey Dale, what did you have prepared? What was the series?
Yeah,
the argument from contingency.
Yeah, so basically I was interested in kind of probing him. He had a video on the contingency argument for God. So basically he was debating with someone, and his main reason for rejecting the contingency argument, the only one he raised in that video, was he rejects the principle of sufficient reason. Because he believes that leads to modal collapse. So yeah, I had a series of questions for him. Like, first of all, just to say, like, define, why do you think it leads to modal collapse? Yeah, so like, I don't know how you want me to do this. I guess asking you guys. Let me ask you guys: Do you guys think that? Do you guys believe in the principle of sufficient reason? And if so, does that lead to modal collapse in your view?
Caleb, I'll hand it to you.
Which
first.
one?
Jackson.
Oh, okay. To compete now. I would hold to like a weak PSR. So you can have things like free will and stuff that really doesn't have a reason, but you could explain it with, God gave us that range of ability. So it's not a complete misnomer, but there is some weakness in that. But yeah, I do think that there's a general PSR. But because there's that indeterminacy, because God has that freedom, I don't think it leads to modal collapse. Some things I think are entailed by that, sure, but I don't know why modal collapse is typically seen as a negative thing. I mean, I guess the intuition is that it seems like things could have been different, right? But the theist doesn't have to deny that if they think God has some kind of freedom within a certain range. So
Right on. Next, we've got Travis Worth. What's going on, big guy?
Hey, doing pretty good. Just got here. Not really sure what exactly we're doing here, but I thought I'd just show up and hang out and throw my 2 cents into whatever we're talking about.
All right. No, that's cool. Yeah. Well, we had a show with Danny, but I don't know if he thought it was a Saturday or what.
Oh, okay.
So I've been trying to get a
So
hold
I
of
mean,
him, but go ahead.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I just love the discussions around the philosophy of religion. I have a real passion for studying that. So yeah, man, I just love these type of discussions.
So did you hear Dale's question?
Travis?
Yeah, I need to make. Is my audio and everything okay?
Yeah, I hear you perfectly.
Okay, yeah, because it looked like I was skipping. No, actually, I didn't. But just in general, I was saying I have a real love and passion for the philosophy of religion, and so yeah, I mean, I'm up for whatever kind of discussion. If we want to have something else, that's fine too.
Right on. So Dale, ask the question to Travis.
Yeah, so after this, like I wanted to get your take. I do have one other question for you guys afterwards, but my question was
Mhm.
related to the contingency argument, something that Travis was
Oh, okay, yeah,
all
yeah.
about, right? So I was watching a video from Danny at PhilTalk, and his main objection, he only had one objection to it, and he said,
Hmm.
at least that he presented there, and he was saying, well, I reject the principle of sufficient reason. So, and
Ah, okay.
he thinks it leads to modal collapse. So I was just putting
Hmm.
it to you guys. Is that true?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So that's really interesting. There are a number of philosophers who will object to it, especially like a strong PSR, right? That's why I prefer Josh Rasmussen's principle of explanation. What he has a much more modest claim where he says, "Hey, look, we explain everything that we can. So basically, if something seems contingent and it if we could conceive of it having an explanation, then it probably does." All things being equal. So I would just appeal to Josh Rasmussen's more modest principle of explanation, and it can kind of cut around that. And so we're still, left with that contingency thing that, hey, contingent things, likely have a necessary foundation / explanation for why they are. And so that's the route Rasmussen would take, which I'm pretty sympathetic to that.
Awesome.
Right on. Caleb Johnson. You have anything on that?
Can I pass? Can I pass?
You can, of course, you can. So what was your follow up?
Actually, I'm gonna have to look into that principle of explanation Travis mentioned. So
Yeah. One area where there's a book, the new a new theist response to the new atheist, where Josh Rasmussen does his argument for a supreme foundation, and that's where he really clearly lays out the principle of explanation. He calls it PE for short. Yeah, and it's very modest. It's just that if something probably like other things being equal, if it likely would have an explanation, or if it's something we could conceive of as having an explanation, then it probably does. All the things just being equal. So,
right on, Dale. What was your follow up?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, just to answer that, I'll just quickly say, like, yeah, I agree with Travis and Caleb Jackson. Look, I was going to be probing him. Look, there are different versions, and he's aware of this, of the principle of sufficient.
oh yeah.
So we can adopt a weaker one, right? People like Alexander Proust, they try to say, well, only contingent facts need an explanation. I don't even think we need to go to that level. I just use the same.
Yeah, and
good.
Right, and Rasmussen's was even more modest than that. So it's like, at some point, no, we need to, if something probably has an explanation for its existence, then we're being logically coherent and positing an explanation for its existence. So
Exactly. Yeah. So like in my own contingency argument, I use sort of a moderate one, but we can go even weaker, right? Like every contingent thing. I think that's what the principle of explanation.
that's what
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
Bruce would say something like contingent facts.
No,
Have an
not
explanation.
facts though. Like contingent things is the one. So it's even.
Yeah. I'm sorry. You're right. Yeah, contingent things. Yeah, I'm sorry, not facts. Yeah.
No problem. So yeah, I was going to ask about that. I was also going to ask, what if we don't even posit an explanatory principle, but we use a causal principle to answer the Glendower problem? But here's my.
Yeah.
So we got a question from the audience. Are you guys theistic? Yes, we are theistic. We host a number of different views on different conversations and see where the truth lies. And at the end of the day, you choose.
Yeah. I'm an Orthodox Christian, so yeah.
I'm
Orthodox Christians.
Caleb's a heretic.
Orthodox Christians are just second-rate Catholics, but that's
second-rate
Catholic. Yeah, we don't
and
have
Dale's a straight heathen. Both of Caleb's are heretics,
right?
And Travis Worth is just somewhere out in Mystic Land.
Yeah,
he's
the divine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I did have I had two things I was going to talk about, but if Dale wants to go and finish his point, I don't want to interrupt him.
Yeah, go ahead, Dale.
So this is the last question that I want. It's kind of, I think that there's been presented a modal argument that proves that at least the watered down version of the principle of sufficient reason that I'm using is not just true, but necessarily true. So basically it's based on a reductio ad absurdum argument, right? So it says, look, let's just say for the sake of argument for reductio that it's possible that the universe could exist without an explanation. Well, it's also logically possible that the universe exists with an explanation, kind of thing, right?
Right.
That would be possible. And then there's this principle in philosophy, logically possible things or states of affairs can be false, even though they're possible.
Yeah.
That's self-evident, right? Known as the Bauer axiom. And so basically it's saying, look, there's a possible world where the universe exists without an explanation and possible worlds where the universe exists with an explanation. Well, what differentiates those worlds? There has to be something in the set of true things or facts in that world that account for why the universe exists with an explanation versus not. So therefore, it requires an explanation. So in that possible world, the universe both exists without an explanation and also has an explanation. That's contradictory, that's ridiculous and absurd. So that's how that modal argument works. But yeah, I just wanted to put it to you guys, what you guys thought of that.
I'd have to think about that in terms of like having the necessity of the universe be like a predicate for existing in all, like necessarily existing in all worlds. But I mean, I have thought about that, where if God is only metaphysically necessary but not logically necessary, then any world in which God exists and he exists with aseity, you'd have to ask, but why is it this world and not some other world where God doesn't exist, right? So I think you do have to get to, I don't say you can get around you can accept a contingency argument but not accept like an ontological argument. So gotcha. Yeah, I if that's kind of where you're coming from, then I can see the connection.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna I had two completely separate points. One of them was one of the arguments for universalism that we discussed in one of the chats, and the other one was, which we can do the second one first. I don't know if you saw. So Mike Winger made a video, and this was in a comment he had made about Graham Oppie when someone asked him how are they like really intelligent.
Oh,
yeah. And Joe Schmid made a video responding to that, and then Kyle Allender and Apologetic Squared and I made a video responding to Joe Schmid and agreeing with him on some areas. So I just I know that you probably, not all of you probably have. Well, I think Travis probably is aware of what I'm talking about, but I don't.
Yeah.
But what do you think about that in terms of like does the idea that at least the existence of God is like certainly debated in philosophy of religion, that there are like really intelligent non-believers who
Okay.
at least appear to be rational, even if we might have honest disagreements. Does that, like, should we remain agnostic? Should that do anything should that make us hesitant to accept that on either
Well,
side, or how does that work?
yeah, I mean, in a sense, but not too much, because I could, you could say, like, well, first of all, there was a huge mistake that he made in terms of Oppie. So Oppie, he compares theories in light of their theoretical virtues. It's not that he
Right.
appeals to intuition. I had to get that off my chest, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, you could look at it. You could say, like, well, you have people like Oppie and Draper that are brilliant philosophers of religion, and they find naturalism to be the most plausible explanation of reality, and so forth. But then you could just as easily say, yeah, but I mean, then again, you have people like Swinburne and Rasmussen who seem to answer them very well, arguably better even than and so, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't, it's more why they disagree with us than that they disagree with us. Because I mean, you can find brilliant scholars on both sides, and it's kind of like what Josh Rasmussen would say, that I think there's a very powerful elethic value to this disagreement, because what it can do is it can shave away arbitrary aspects of our own view when we let the light of reason shine onto our path. And that's what a lot of these atheological arguments can do in the philosophy of religion, is they really help us home in on what our own theory is. And I think they're a blessing in disguise, actually. So I don't know if that answers what you're going for. Or...
Sort of, yeah. I think it did, probably in a more profound way than I could have said. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else had any thoughts on that.
He just has the hots for Rasmussen, so you're gonna.
Yeah, I tell you.
I mean, but who doesn't?
Right? Yeah, Rasmussen and even Swinburne. Hey, I like Mulder too.
Travis just has a big like portrait of Swinburne in his living room. Like, oh, is that your like grandfather? It's like, no, it's just a philosopher I like.
Yeah.
Yeah. No relation.
Yeah. I got like an icon.
He has stained glass of Richard Swinburne.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in here real quick. I don't think it doesn't create any issues for me within my view. I agree with Travis that there's no reason for us to fear looking at things rationally. If we really dig for the truth on things, then I honestly believe as Christians we have nothing to worry about. And some of the smartest people I've ever talked with hold different views than I do. I've met some brilliant atheists, just like I've met some brilliant Christians. But we reach different conclusions, and that's kind of how life is. So it doesn't really create any problems for me in regards to my Christianity. But anything I can learn from somebody else helps give me another angle to look at truth with. So
does it create problems though if for like the potential consequences? Like if you were talking to an atheologian and they're like, I respect your views and I get that, but I just can't find myself to be convinced by these arguments. Like, and does that mean I'm going to go to hell or be separated from Christ just because I happen to ultimately not be persuaded by it? Right. Like, is that kind of the idea of like, because the stakes are so high that such reservation should be kind of a bigger deal?
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because if we take a version of Pascal's wager, not the traditional one, but if we use Pascal's wager to compare various religions and the outcomes of those religions, then yeah, that's a great discussion to have with somebody, I think, who maybe holds to that kind of view. But I still don't think that. I think God ultimately works all things to his good. Whether that means universalism, I'm undecided on that. But I think that given time, people will get to the point that they need to be in relationship with God, or should they totally reject that? They totally reject that. You could be the smartest person in the world and still reject that if you don't take it from a head to a heart thing. There are plenty of Christians and Christian apologists out there who are so intellectual on it, but if you never take it back to the heart and the belief of actually taking those steps in faith, then it's pointless to even have that Christian rationalization as well.
Yeah, as I was thinking about that and kind of like to kind of go back to what I said, one way I can see that atheologians are very valuable to theism is let's take something like the problem of evil and the problem of hell, right? So you have two like pretty good atheological arguments. Well, when the best theistic philosophers, it makes us, really start doing our intellectual homework. And so you have someone like Trent Doherty who will come up with like the saint seeking story under the defeat condition, right? And what it can do is it really like trims the version of theism where we have a more robust view of theism. And then like with the problem of hell, so you have something like the defeat condition with likely and telling universalism and post-mortem soul building. So I like that when we address these issues, they can really like narrow in a more coherent version of theism, I would argue.
I agree with that. And that's why that's kind of why I argue for that position.
Yeah.
Like, it seems more consistent to me. But I guess that gets into the second thing we're going to get to then, which was that about the hold on, was it?
We got a question from the audience. Ray, we are going to get to this question now real quick. Caleb's actually the guy to talk to. He's actually writing a book on miracles. So do we believe in supernatural claims from other groups in antiquity besides the Jews and the Christians? I have no problem believing that there's other supernatural claims. Of course, every claim I like to examine each one specifically. And it's hard to do with ancient antiquity in some cases, I'm sure. But yeah, I don't have a problem with God working. If there is a God and God is real, then yeah, absolutely. I think he would work in other cultures as well.
Yeah, I'll just comment briefly and hand it over to you guys because I don't have too much to say here. But there are a few things. So, in fact, this kind of, in Eastern Orthodoxy, especially, we hold that there are a lot of these mystical experiences and, religious miracles and things like that. And I think it's also compatible with like Michael Heiser's view of the divine council and how, according to that theology, like certain angelic type forces or over certain nations. And so that's perfectly consistent within my theology to say, there are like these deities of these other cultures, that could be doing miraculous things. So theologically speaking, I don't really have a problem with it. I just say, let it stand on its own merits, really.
Yeah. I think in principle, I don't have an issue with certain kinds of miracles in other religions. But in terms of like, do I think that the evidence is there? And we can talk about ancient antiquity. We can even talk about modern day. I mean, like, I think that there'd be better evidence for something like Hindu gurus during I can't talk today, doing like miraculous feats, quote unquote, like India or something, than we would in the ancient world. But I think there's parallels there. But I'm open to it, but I think from the cases we have, I don't think the evidence is as good. And part of that's just because the Western world just has better documentation overall. And part of that's just because it's hard to find good sources for a lot of this stuff and a lot of good investigation. But you do have claims in the ancient world like the healings of Asclepius or something. But even when you look at something like Vespasian, the Roman emperor who famously healed a blind man and a crippled man, Tacitus, the historian who's talking about this, says, now, the guy wasn't actually blind. He had something in his eyes that Vespasian took out. And the guy who was crippled had his arm dislocated and it was just put back in. But the people believed this and thought it was a miracle, So even back then, you kind of have ones where people were like, oh, that's a miracle. And it was really like kind of your standard faith healing stuff. So it's hard to rule a lot of that out as well. But you just have to set your criteria beforehand and look at it on a case-by-case basis is what I would say.
Yeah.
Amen. Just what I said, but you said it way more eloquently.
Right.
Yeah.
Caleb Johnson.
Yeah. So I have some history in the prestidigitation world as a magician and kind of being with those kind of crowds. So I spend a lot of time more on the modern stuff, comparing modern miracles, modern miracle claims to what we have. And I honestly don't have a problem running into a real miracle from another religion. It's just then the question is, do we have a source of power that adequately explains this in Christianity? And as Travis mentioned, in the divine council view, we do believe there are other forces present working both for and against God in some sense. So it's not a catch-all. Like Caleb said, you got to look at it on a case-by-case basis as to what each of these situations is. But I think we do have adequate explanations for a lot of those situations.
Right. That aren't even inherently supernatural. I mean, you can say some of them might be, but that doesn't mean that they that should be the Christian's default of, well, maybe it's some other supernatural being. Like, it's a possibility, but I think that you should, try to include fraud or legend or exaggeration first.
Yeah.
Or like,
Absolutely.
how dare you even suggest that, right? But we're
Yeah,
not
just kind of let
credulity. We're not advocating you should say you should believe every supernatural claim you hear.
Right.
No, I
Right.
would say the same thing for Christian miracle claims.
Right,
I look at them as being skeptical first too.
For every
Regardless,
one I can give you that I think is legitimate, I could probably
Well,
give you 7 that are not. So
I want to get to our word of faith guy, Dale Glover, who believes that the shroud was a medieval miracle. So I want to give him a chance to respond.
That's interesting.
I don't believe it, but I'm
he's
open
being
to
facetious.
it. But
Okay.
before I get to that stuff, we can talk about the shroud. That's great. But to answer her question, Rhea's question, do I actually believe in the supernatural claims of other groups in antiquity? It doesn't necessarily religious. Absolutely, I do. Acts chapter 16, verse 16 to 24 talks about Paul and his experience with the slave girl who has a demonic spirit and is actually predicting the future. That's supernatural, if you ask me. So, yes, I do believe. Obviously, that's on the basis of scripture and that sort of thing. But I think that the main question here is, look, I differentiate different types of miracles and miracles for certain purposes. I tend not to be interested in, or I didn't research like Caleb Jackson, miracles for other purposes like compassion or miracle healings and stuff like that. So thank goodness people like Caleb and Craig Keener are out there doing that aspect. I focus on miracles that the purpose is to authenticate the Christian religion. And on that front, I've studied a lot of claims, and I have not found a single one apart from miracles for Christianity that actually fulfill the criteria for being authentic. So, yeah, the shroud is a case in point on that front.
Even if it happened in the Middle Ages.
Even if it happened in the Middle Ages.
This is an inside joke between me and Dale, guys. So.
Yeah, see, that's
okay.
I don't want to hold off on this too long because I want to go on something else. But just to ask on that, because I know that Dale's open to that view. I think from a theological standpoint, I just can't wrap my head around that in terms of what. Like, I could see if the shroud of Jesus was left that way to like vindicate the resurrection, but I can't make sense in terms of God's reasoning as to why he would ex nihilo put an image on a medieval shroud in order to convince people that it was, from the 1st century. So like, especially people who are already religious, people who already accept the Christian religion predominantly. Like, if it's not leading to, I think one aspect of a vindication miracle is that it needs to occur in a culture that is mostly not open to it, or that it's changing minds, right? So Jesus resurrected from the dead in Jerusalem. That's one example. Muhammad, even though I don't believe Muhammad was a prophet, theoretically that would be one. Joseph Smith would theoretically be one. Most religious claims, even vindication ones, happen in a context where people already accept the religion, like especially like Hindu gurus. This is another example. Like, this is another criticism I have, like Eucharist miracles, right? Like, why are Eucharist miracles always occurring primarily in not only just Catholic settings, but that are really only being talked about by Catholic? They're not like really being where a priest comes and does this in front of a bunch of Protestants and it changes their mind. Like, I think I think the point of a vindication miracle, it would be expected this would happen in a culture that would like give the message to, not a culture that already is prone to believe it. That to me is kind of a red flag. So that's one thing I would say in terms of why I would be theologically very hesitant to accept God just doing a vindication miracle in a culture that's already privy to Christianity.
Okay, well, bear in mind, it's not just for that culture, because it has survived today, and stirp has happened in our atheistic modern culture where we have the actual evidence and proof that it is a miracle. So that's, we have to take an all throughout time consideration, not just the cultures. Secondly, even the culture in the medieval era, that was Catholicism, and I would be very concerned to say like, oh well, Catholicism proper is Christianity. No, maybe Geoffrey de Charny was, for whatever reason, we can just make up whatever scenario we want, right? But he needed that miracle, and he got it. For God in His providence did that, and that converted him. He had enough to come to saving faith or something, and this strengthened the faith. And through time, we had stirp, and this led to a bunch of people, including atheists, agnostics, Jews, coming to faith in God, who I know personally and have told me that because of the shroud they believe. I don't know.
That's cool. That's cool. I want to get back to Caleb's original question that he had first. And Caleb, if you could just restate it one more time.
The Oppie one, or
kind of went off.
The Oppie one, or the second one about universalism?
About universalism.
Oh yeah. So this is kind of an argument that I've been thinking about with Andrew Horonich. If you know him, he's writing a big book on universalism right now. He's been on Cameron's channel before. Cool guy. Mm-hmm. And so, I was thinking about, like, could we formulate an argument to where it kind of takes the idea of, like, here are worlds in which God could and couldn't create, and it basically gets you sort of to an a priori acceptance of universalism, where it's like either God should not create at all, or God should create a world where universalism is true, but you shouldn't have something in between. That's kind of the point of it. So the premise, it's not like I can't do it purely in a syllogistic form, but the main premise is, I think the first one that I don't think would be overly controversial, is that God, being all perfectly good, would want to actualize the most valuable states of affairs. And there may not be a single best possible world, but there are at least kinds of possible worlds, right? I know Travis probably wouldn't disagree with that in that way. So that's not usually a premise. The second two parts, I think, might be a little bit more debatable. So the first principle is that I don't think the existence of persons in and of itself is necessarily a good thing. It can be a good thing, but like, God is not doing something immoral by not creating more persons, and people who choose to not have kids are not doing something immoral by not bringing forth more image bearers of God, right? And of course, there are worlds we can think of where if God just created people just to torture them, let's say in a possible world, that even though there would be image bearers of gods in that world, that wouldn't be a good world if it was just torture with no kind of redemption, right? So I think that the point of this is that, like, persons are valuable, but persons who can grow and grow closer to God and morally develop are the most valuable, right? So that's the one. The second point is that free will, in the way that it is a good, it's a valuable good, but it's only good in the context of soul making and moral improvement to an end. So we can imagine a world where God gives people absolute libertarian freedom, but let's say that there is no connection between it. So every time David, let's say, is created by God, and David can choose between good or evil action. There's a little girl. He can either smack her in the face or he can give her a hug, right? Let's say every time David does the action, whichever one, his memory is wiped and he goes right back to it again, and he has to make the decision again, make the decision again. So under this way, you do get libertarian free agents who can do good or bad with libertarian free will. But that wouldn't really be a good world, because you're not growing from it. You're not building a character. You're just essentially a random number generator who is just randomly doing good, bad, good, good, bad, with no rhyme or reason. Whereas even under libertarianism, if you develop a character and get more mature and get more predictable as you get older, I think that's a better good, right? So that's the second point. So the analogy there is that okay, under universalism, this does have an end to it, but under the two, eventually you do keep striving towards that. But under the two other models, which are conditionalism and eternal conscious torment, On conditionalism, this soul-making process is just cut off eventually. It just stops happening, and it's essentially equivalent to the memory wipe. And under the ECT one, it almost goes in the opposite direction, to where the person never is able to actually progress in the soul-making. They either grow further from God or they stay stagnant. And so both of those seem to violate that principle of progression in that way. And so the idea is that free will is only a good thing. It only ultimately, or at least it's most valuable if it's in this way that can lead to moral progression, not simply just doing a moral action freely and that's it. So if you're accepting those two premises, then God really would want to actualize a world in which everyone used their freedom to morally grow and eventually come to this relationship with God. If God does a world where some people do, some people don't, he's not fulfilling that full potential. And of course, God could simply not create any world at all, and he wouldn't be doing anything inherently wrong with that. And so the last point of that is that God is essentially gambling, because you could say, well, God, yes, people might go to hell, but God would be depriving those people who he didn't create to go to heaven. But as we said, like deprivation, like it is wrong to murder a person, but it's not wrong to not have that person, right? So deprivation, the person's not missing out. And of course, there's always people God doesn't create, right? He's never created an actual infinite number of people. So God's not doing anything wrong by not creating, but God would be doing something wrong by creating and having some fail. And there are ethics to gambling, right? So you could say it may be worth it for some and not worth it for others. But the point is that if the stakes are that high, it would actually be wrong for God to make those bets with free will, essentially like that. That there are situations in which you wouldn't take a bet. If you could make a bet to where you can play a poker game, and if you win, you can solve world hunger. But if you lose the bet, you have to sell your entire family into sex slavery for the rest of their lives. Or you can just not play the game at all. I think you would probably just not take the chance and play the game at all, even if it could potentially lead to a greater good, right? Like, is it worth that risk? So is hell worth the risk of the good that comes with that? Or is God better off not creating? So yeah, in conclusion, the best options are either God chooses to not create at all, or God chooses to create a world in which universalism is held. But anything in between would not be worth the risk of creating, because the value would be lost. So that's my thoughts.
All right, so let me jump on this first. Let me hand Dale. What do you think first? Because we let Travis go last time first, and we'll let Dale go first this time.
Okay, so sorry, Caleb, do you mind just kind of like briefly repeating what your question was? Sorry, I was writing down notes from what
that was. It's a lot.
That was pretty long.
It was. I need to come up with a syllogism. So basically, the short point is that this is an argument that God would either be better if universalism is at least like feasibly, if there's a feasible world in which it can't happen, God is better off to not take the chance of creating creatures with free will that can reject him at all. So it's either no creation or universalism, but either the ECT model or the conditionalist model are not worth the risks. And the arguments I gave for that are that principally, one, human beings are not inherently valuable. Like, at least God's not doing anything wrong by not creating them. And I gave arguments for that. And two is that giving human agents free will to accept God is only good if they can do it to morally develop and spiritually grow. And it's not simply just a random act that has no continuity. And under ECT and conditionalism, eventually that continuity is either destroyed or is just made superfluous by being stagnant. And so universalism is the only one that actually gets you to that. So those are the only kinds of goods God would want to make, is ones with persons who can have libertarian free will to grow and soul make. And the other models don't really allow for that in the ultimate sense. So that's the shortened version.
Okay, so I'll answer the last part first. So I would disagree. I think that the eternal conscious torment view, not torture, but under the quarantine model, even in hell, we can utilize our free will to, at least in principle, develop our characters. Now, the fact that the Bible tells us that's not going to happen as a matter of fact doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. So hypothetically, they could pay for their sins and choose to live good lives in hell. I think that
Dale, are you talking about the separationist view? Just for clarification,
the Gary Habermas,
like the C.S. Lewis kind of
the quarantine model, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So I believe they could potentially. Now, obviously, the Bible tells us that that's not going to happen as a matter of fact, but yeah, like I don't take the view that they're locked in their sinfulness and that the punishment is just happening for no reason.
So in principle, they could, if it's just that they won't, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think God knows? I don't know. You're not an open theist, are you, Dale? Do you think God knows that some people will be in that state forever?
Of course, yeah. That's what I was just saying. Like the Bible, divine revelation tells us that that's just not going to be the case. That they're going to take that. So yeah.
But hypothetically, they could. They just like won't.
It's possible. It's just not feasible. I guess you could say.
Yeah. I mean, it's not feasible given their free wills. They just as a matter of fact won't choose to stop sinning in hell, and they're just going to keep earning more and more punishment and corrupting their souls more and more.
So why? Okay, so then that gets to the point of why is that kind of freedom an inherent good? Because I understand it has the entailment of, but you can also use it to accept God, right? But I think, as I said, that like having the free will to simply bring about a good action is not itself a great good unless it comes with this kind of moral progression. Because if God just makes us where he creates us and we do one good act and then we're in heaven, or where we do good one act, forget it, do another act, forget it, and there's no connection, it's equally random, that doesn't seem like that'd be a good thing to have in terms of value. So I think you have to have this idea where there are moral persons, and in the ECT case, they're kind of being they're depriving themselves, given their freedom, of that ability to progress, or at least they're not seeing its fulfillment. And so having that where that's a possibility doesn't seem like it's a very good thing overall.
So I would answer. Oh, okay. Yeah, I would answer that first part of your question. So number one, you're kind of assuming that like overall the net of being in hell in isolation is bad and doesn't come attached with some goods. Maybe people in hell would see some goods. Now, I tend to agree with you that in isolation, any goods that come about in hell, like people living their lives the way they want to, they have their autonomy or something like that. So it's not going to be overall goodness. We have to weigh that against the goods that come about only through creating this universe, whereby the maximum number of free will creatures choose to be saved. And the way I argue is that based on the overall utility. So yeah, you've got so many people in hell. So let's say by the world where God exists alone, let's say that's 10, a utility of 10. Okay. And then by creating this specific world rather than a universalist world, yes, we've got the -2 because we've got the people, or -5, whatever you want to put it as, because of people in hell. But we've also got the +5 of more people being in an eternal, loving, saving relationship, which is better than just God alone. So it equals out to 10. 10 minus 5 plus 5 equals out to 10. And that makes it a free choice on God's part to choose to create or to not create. Both have an equal overall utility.
But isn't the difference though is that God is basically gambling with someone else's autonomy at that point by actualizing that world, whereas if it was just him, it would only be up to him and his responsibility.
Okay. Say that again, the first part.
Yeah, so like the last part of the argument was that like there are ethics to gambling, and that when I say gambling, I'm referring to like the indeterminacy of free will. So I know you're not an open theist, but like if God, let's say even under Molyneux's view, where God has this, like he can see all of it before actualizing it and make that decision. In order for God to even choose to actualize it, he is taking some kind of compromise, some kind of gamble. And I'm saying that there are instances where even if it comes a great good, we still would not, it would still be immoral for you to take that bet and do that. And I gave the example of if you could play a poker game where if you win, you can solve world hunger, but if you lose, all of your family has to be sold into horrible sex slavery and torture for the rest of their lives. Or you could choose to not play the game at all. You probably wouldn't play the game at all and not take that risk, even if it could potentially bring out a greater good, right? Even if that good is immeasurable. I mean, the amount of people who would get food would be far greater than the number of people who would have to be sex slave, but I think that would still be such a horrible evil that we wouldn't want to risk that and do a completely utilitarian view of it. So that's kind of the parody of that, to say that even if you can bring about a large number of good through this, the badness of hell wouldn't make that risk, especially for eternity, wouldn't make that risk worth it taking at that point.
Yeah, that's where I would just deny, and I'll shut up after this and give it to Travis. But
I wanted to ask you a question, Dill.
Oh, okay, cool.
Travis is sort of helping me out here. I think he's.
The thing is that the bads of hell are worth taking it, in my view. They're not as bad as you're making it seem, kind of thing. I don't think people in hell are going to be. Yes, it's going to be torment and stuff like that. I'm not denying that it's oh, it's going to be like heaven, but I'm just saying it's not going to be like as bad as you're making it seem. It's not analogous to like, oh well,
Right.
I can save the world, but I've got to rape babies or something like that. But
Are
yeah,
there worlds, are there like hypothetical versions of hell that you would say it would be immoral for that? Like, okay, there was billions of people saved in heaven, but like, let's say that hell was actually this fiery torture chamber, and only 5 people went there. Would you still take that risk, or do you think that would be one where you don't think it'd be worth it? In this type, I know it's not what you think, but in this type, like, do you concede that there are situations in which you wouldn't take those risks, and that you just don't think this is analogous, or would you say no? I would still take that bet of 5 people being tortured in hell versus billions who are saved
yeah.
of
So
their own
the
free will.
answer is I do think that there are ones where the cons outweigh the negative, and God could
Yeah.
not create those worlds.
Mm-hmm. So
So
it's just going to be a subjective idea of what's how bad is the negative versus how good is the positive, I guess.
Yeah, so I think, like, for example, if we had the traditional understanding of hell, like the torture chamber model, where
Mhm.
the majority of people are being tortured for like mindlessly and mind-numbing pain and stuff like that, that would not justify any amount, really. I
Mhm.
like, again, I allow for the possibility, but I'm at least 95% certain that would not be a good enough world. God could not create that world.
Right. No, I agree with you on that. But that's kind of what I'm trying to say. Like, this is almost like an anti-natalist argument, which is kind of interesting. But it's the idea that if you're not creating, like, by God not creating the righteous, he's not depriving. I mean, deprive in the way that, like, it's not like they're missing out where they're aware that they're missing this, right? It's not like you're not harming someone by not birthing them or not creating them, but you are harming someone by putting them in that situation, even if they freely choose it. So I guess the idea that God really isn't losing. I mean, he may not be actualizing total value, but he's also not losing anything when it comes to not creating. And so it just comes down to how you balance the numbers, I guess, at that point. So that's fair. I just feel like that just has such a nihilistic view of the damned, though, where they're almost disposable, where it's like, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, and you were the cracked eggs in this case.
Yeah, but
It's
that
kind of
reminds me
a
of
bad
Chris.
way to do it.
You should read. You're basically making the argument that Chris Byron did for my master's thesis on the Evil God Challenge. He said
Yeah.
exactly that argument that you're making. So,
Which
yeah.
I didn't read, so it is, it's, you think your thoughts are original, and then it's like, oh no, someone else did it before you.
Someone was there. Yeah. All
there.
right, Travis, you've been trying to ask me something for a while. So,
Right. So I do like where Caleb is kind of trying to go with this. It reminds me of Nevin Klimenhaga has a paper called "Infinite Value in the Best of All Possible Worlds," and it uses universalism as a key premise. That God will create, like, let's say, a finite number of good things, but He will just eternally increase value and just keep creating, like so He infinitely creates infinite value. Which is, I think we want to say that God would, seek to, like, create a finite number of valuable things and then just eternally increase their value. And so that's a way that it's plausible that he can, create a world with infinite value. But because while I am a universalist, I'm also sympathetic to, like, the model you were talking about, Dale, with sort of like the C.S. Lewis separationist type view. And I don't think it's successful in showing, or I don't know, is it Caleb's argument, is successful in showing that it's immoral to create that kind of world, because, and it's like even Trent Doherty kind of chimed in on this with the defeat condition. You could say, that the evils and sufferings of those individuals, can be defeated, and them just being aware that they could have made the best of their, opportune situations, and that plausibly they even still could. It's just that they won't. So it's not clear to me that it's immoral for God to create that kind of world. But what I would say, though, and this is where I think Caleb's argument could take a more modest view and kind of probably come out ahead, because you just say, like, okay, well, even if that doesn't cancel them out, let's compare the two. Let's say both are plausible, the universalist model or that view of hell. It seems that if God is intent on maximizing value, he would go with the universal model. And so it seems like you could make an abductive case that, given the two and given God's, like, perfect goodness, this seems the more plausible explanation. What do you think of that?
Okay, so yes, in this hypothetical realm, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
say that we
If
could,
you're just comparing the two, yeah.
yeah, like if we could have two worlds, right? So there's the God alone world, and then there's this world, and then there's a third world where the same number, let's pretend there's 5 billion souls that get saved in this world, just for the sake of argument. But there's this other world where there's 5 billion people that get saved and no one goes to hell. The third world would have greater value. That would be better. In fact, that would be, I might even argue, that would be necessary for God. That's better than the God alone world. Creation would be necessary if that was the case. But it's just not factually, it's metaphysically impossible for such a world to exist because our right people with their, in order to be saved, it requires a free will response on the human being. That's part of the equation. And it's just
right.
will not.
So it's kind of like this idea that well, in order to have a truly loving relationship with God, there has to, at least metaphysically speaking, be the possibility of rejecting that. Is that what you're saying? Or no, you aren't.
So I'm not making the Swinburne argument there, but I'm just kind of saying, like, in order to be saved, free will is a necessary prerequisite. That like our making that choice is just how relationships work.
Well, but if you hold to Molinism, it seems like God could just put you in like the punishment phase of the afterlife, in the right punishments where he knows eventually you will freely.
But Dale could just deny. Dale could just say there's literally no feasible world in which that would work.
That is what
so he's basically taking a trend. So this argument is actually sort of an extended version of Mackey's objection to the free will defense. Although it's much, ultimately, it's not saying that God can't actualize the world with sin, but it's saying God can't actualize it ultimately to where that would be. And so I think the only way you could do is to take some kind of trans world depravity view where there's literally worlds in which the person would never become that, or in a world in which they would, it would be a worse overall. And that's where, but then to me, I feel like the issue is like, how do we even have these connotations? Like, how is it like, is a world where, let's say there's a world where there's only 20 people and all of them are saved. Is that better than a world where there's 5 billion people who are saved, but there's 100 million that are lost? Like, is it the ratio? Is it the percentage? Is it the exact number? Because God can always make one more person to save. Like, how are we determining these value judgments? I feel like it seems arbitrary in terms of like, how long does the person get to develop before they're judged? Like all these
right.
Can't know.
That's
oh, go ahead, Travis.
Oh, what I was going to say about that, that's why a lot of philosophers of religion will say that, God creates like X amount of people, a finite number, and just, he eternally increases the value of that finite. And so that way you have him creating an infinitely valuable world, even with a finite number of people.
So it's, yeah. And like I said, yeah, I would, I had a point and I lost it, but, yeah,
I'm sorry.
I had a response to Caleb's thing.
But, David, do you have anything to say in this, or Caleb?
I have a lot. I feel
like you've been sitting there for a while.
I was gonna hit it to Caleb first because I saw him stewing as well, and I have a lot to say on it, but I want to reserve judgment, and really evaluate it a little more. I think it's missing a lot. I think there's a lot missing in the argument. Of course, I'm not a universalist either.
Right.
I do take pretty similar to Dale's view on the quarantine model and stuff like that. I think that there is a lot, like when I was just looking at over the argument, because I copied it like Travis and pasted it. I wasn't able to go over it as much. I'm finishing up the master's. I only got like one class left, and so I've been like dumping a lot into studying and stuff and get ready for that thesis on the problem of evil. But more like point one, moral agents are not inherently valuable. I was going to ask you more like, what do you mean by they're not inherently valuable? And this is, I'm also going, I'm not going to answer what has already been answered right now. I'm just kind of asking you on clarity there.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I mean they're not inherently valuable, I'm saying it is not simply that the best world is one where there's just the greatest number of moral beings simplicator, and that's it. There are situations where it would be better to not have, like, if having more agents would worsen the lives of some others, right? Or like if God made a world where more agents, but they were always being tortured or in pain, that wouldn't be a good world, right? Overall. Or if you know, having kids is a good thing, but having too many would lead to you not being able to take care of your other ones, it would be better for you to not have those extra kids. So there are situations which it's better to not bring forth
Yeah, I get
these
that part.
moral agents. Okay. So God is not doing anything wrong by not creating. That's the point, right? He may
Yeah,
not be
and
actualized if it leads to a net bad overall. Like, it's not just saying, oh, God creates persons, it's good, it's a net gain of value no matter what. It's saying that's not always the case. It could theoretically be a net loss depending on the situation, right? So
yeah, then
that's yeah.
I would probably convert that to that point versus saying moral agents are not inherently valuable, because that right off the bat, it's like, okay, what do you mean they're not inherently valuable when intrinsically they carry the image of God?
Maybe I could say
And what is that?
unconditionally.
Yeah, like what is that? What does that say when someone carries that value inherently,
Mhm.
uh, the image of God inherently within them or on them, and they're
Right.
made in the image of God? I mean, that is
But if
they're
other
automatically
but if the
valuable.
existence of them harms other image bearers of God, then that's where it would get. It's like, would you have a kid if you knew they were going to be a serial killer? Like, if you could, like, would you choose to have that kid? Probably not.
I don't know. Like I know that they're gonna die one day anyway, and I do have them,
Travis.
Yeah,
and then
Travis.
I'm also thinking of the whole idea too, like with where does the atonement come into? Because I was thinking a little bit on that, and it
Mhm.
was like, okay, well, God, I mean, knew what was going to happen to his son and sent him anyway,
Right.
and there's just something, there's a lot more there that I think as a universalist you're missing out on. And there's more to the story, basically. I think we have to rope in theology with an answer that's, if I'm going to treat it, like it should be, the argument like it should be, I'm not going to be
Mhm.
able to answer it philosophically, just philosophically. I'm going to need to also answer it theologically,
Mhm.
because I think that plays in a very important role. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things I agree with Dale. I think there's some things that are necessary for relationships to exist. Like I think you have to have free moral agents for love to exist, right? So I mean, those things like that, those things come into play where they fit in this argument, and how I would compose an argument against it or polemic against it. That's yet to be determined. So
Right.
that's
But
why.
that universalists don't deny the existence of free moral agents that accept God. Right.
Absolutely, I
Right.
do, and
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I'm not isolating. I'm
Yeah,
really not.
you're not strawmanning. It's not like
Yeah,
the Frank Turek idea of,
absolutely.
oh, universalists
Yeah.
think God's dragging you kicking and screaming into heaven, right? Or something like
No,
that. Like,
no,
that's,
no,
yeah.
that's
Caleb,
nonsense.
Yeah,
No, no.
I have a question for you, kind of thing, on
Mhm.
this universalism thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so let's say that universalism is true here. When you're comparing, okay, all 20 billion human beings who ever existed, they get saved. Obviously, the more our common sense is, the more loving people in an eternal, righteous, worthwhile relationship that salvation posits on a Christian worldview,
Mhm.
these are goods in and of themselves. So it looks like by
Right.
God creating, there's only pluses. He's getting bonuses. So that would be better than God alone. That would mean that creation is necessary.
Yeah.
You know that creation is not necessary. So how do you reconcile that then?
So I'm not sure what you mean by creation is not necessary. I don't know what Travis's view on this, but I think that if you think that God needs to actualize a great state of affairs of value, I think that creation is almost an entailment. Now, God has freedom within that creation, but I'm okay with there being a quasi modal collapse there, in that way. So I actually do think that it's entailed that a perfect being would create a world with inherently more value than not, unless that world had, a net loss of value or something like that. But yeah, I do think that God is gaining more value by creating, not to himself, but just, the actualizing the state of affairs, right? By creating more value in the long run,
So
in that
that's
way.
interesting. So that makes the creation of the universe almost logically necessary. It's logically entailed given
Mhm.
God is. So okay, cool. Like I disagree with that because I think
Mhm.
the universe is contingent and stuff. But that's interesting. Yeah.
Well,
Thank
it's still well, okay. So when necessary, it's entailed, but it's not say. It's not like the universe is the prime mover. God is still the explanation behind it. So And it is partially contingent. I think there's aspects of it that are contingent. Like God could have made more stars. God could have made a world with different physics. Like it's not like he has to make our exact universe. We're just talking about the kinds. But if by necessary you mean like it's entailed by it, I would say yes. But that doesn't mean that the universe, that like the contingency argument is ruled out because the universe is like the prime mover. Because a necessary thing can still require an explanation if it's dependent, right? So dependency is what's important here. The universe definitely is dependent on God.
Interesting. So it's like a number then. It's necessary dependent. So okay.
Yeah, it's like if you have a freezer, and there's ice in it and the freezer's past eternally exists necessarily, then the ice that if the freezer's lower than 32 degrees, well, I know you're Canadian, 0 degrees Celsius, right? And it has ice in it. The ice isn't necessarily entailed by that, but that doesn't mean that the ice doesn't have is the final explanation. I could explain it by saying, oh, well, the freezer has these conditions to create the ice. So I don't think that's a problem. I think it still requires an explanation. So I'm still on board with the contingency argument. I think Travis might agree with that, by the way, but I have to ask him when he gets back.
All right, cool. Yeah, that's definitely a difference on our end. But no, I just wanted to clarify that. So thanks.
At least I'm consistent, though, right?
You are consistent. Yep.
Yeah.
Caleb.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in here with another clarifying question. So, why would this argument not allow for an annihilationist perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the second point of that argument was to show that so free will is a good thing if it leads to this kind of soul-making character building, right? And that I think we would agree that free will where it's just you can make a good decision and then let's say your memory is wiped and all your free will decisions are independent of each other and doesn't have a character, doesn't have a story around it. That's not overly valuable compared to the other model you could have where people have agency. People have moral development. And so the idea is that, okay, so let's take that and let's extend it. What if we could do 2 actions and our memory is wiped? Would that be good? I don't know, about 5. And then every 5th one, what number do we cut off to say, okay, now it is? And I'm saying that I don't think there's any. I think it's only consistent to have it keep building. So if it's just, okay, let's say the average person makes 200,000 moral decisions in their life, and then they get annihilated when they die if they're not a believer. Why was that any more valuable than 2, right? In terms of it being potentially infinite, which I think it is potentially infinite if eternal life is true. So it's kind of the idea of there's this level of arbitrariness in terms of why destroy them here, why annihilate them at this point and not earlier, and why is it a good thing to make them go through this if in the end it's just going to be wiped out and be ultimately pointless? And that goes to the suffering too. I think suffering is meant to draw us closer to God in that way. And if these people go through suffering, ended up being annihilated anyway, and it didn't amount to them hitting that goal, then that suffering seems like it was unjust or unwarranted. Where if God knows that someone is not going to freely accept him, I feel like it would be better for him to just have them have a life of bliss rather than have them have a life of struggle and all this stuff with freedom and then annihilate themselves. I don't see why that would be a good thing if that suffering doesn't amount to anything good ultimately. So that's kind of the argument there. Whereas universalism, that suffering does amount to ultimate salvation with Christ.
Interesting. I would still push that further, because even if the person does not have moral character building for themselves, their collective actions on society could ultimately move God's purpose for and could be a contributing factor in the saving of those people who do make it, right? So
yeah, that's a common Molinist response, and I have 2 issues with that. First, I don't think that's empirically always true. There are, for example, in Australia, the Aborigines, let's just assume that they're not saved for the sake of argument, they weren't Christians at least. They were isolated for, I think, 30,000 years before any Europeans ever came over with Christianity, right? So if you want to argue that every single one of those Aborigines was necessary for the existence of someone else, you're free to do that, but I feel like it's extremely ad hoc, because it's how would that even work causally? It seems very, very, very unlikely that that's the case. And so that's a probabilistic argument. But the second one is, even if that's true, I think that almost makes people a means to an end. It almost makes it to where they're pawns in a game, to where you're disposable. John exists so that Sam can have salvation, and that's ultimately the reason John exists, because John's not going to be in a relationship with God, and so it almost devalues the existence of the damned to where they are essentially pawns in God's game, and they're meant there to be taken by the bishop so that God can make a move, and he has to sacrifice some to save others. So at that point, that would kind of go to the idea of like, is that a moral gamble? Is that worth that risk to have to sacrifice some lives to save most of them, right?
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that clarifies for me at least where you're coming from.
Yeah. And like, how hard would that, like, if I was talking to an unbeliever and they're like, yeah, I'm convinced that like if you don't repent, then your life ultimately was just made for other people to be saved. I mean, it's great that that leads to greater good, but like, how I can't imagine like a more depressing fate than knowing that not only do you not have like a happy ending, but that the entire journey on the way there was meant for someone else and ultimately than for you. And that's just, I don't know, maybe I'm just getting overly emotional on that, but that just seems like worse than any kind of nihilism that naturalism could create.
No, I get you.
Mm-hmm.
So I would also like, where does responsibility fall into on the moral agent too? Just because there's these avenues that have the ability to grow that moral agent, isn't it? It's incumbent upon that free moral agent to also choose to let himself be grown, and there's that. So I wouldn't think that it's necessary to look at it as like John exists for Sam, right? I wouldn't look at it more like that, but Sam had his choice and Sam kind of blew it, or John kind of blew it. But in the great scheme of things, because God can see everything, he knew that how Sam would respond to what happened to John. I mean, there's so many levels to it. That's why I like the argument, because there's so many different levels that you can take it to.
Right.
And oh man, I had another point too.
Yeah, but that's kind of just the idea of like, is it moral for God to allow like, is it better for God to create Sam and John so that John can be saved and Sam can't, or is it better for God to just not create either of them in that way, right? Like,
well, I think and that's also depending on how much value you're putting into that one person receiving eternal life in the presence of a creator, where our minds technically cannot fathom the greatness of that.
Right.
So I mean, there's, like I said, there's so many complex layers that you would have to what if it was moral for God to create just one person to get into heaven because they could receive something that's initially just unfathomably good. Who knows? I mean, there is that level you'd have to consider something like that, I think,
right.
In the theology of it. How, what are we basing our idea of this value on? Is examine everything that has gone on in this world and how that plays into it. how much does sin actually affect everything? I mean, you're almost creating a theodicy almost. That's dealing with kind of like the nature of reality itself, I think. And like I said, there's so many layers. That's why to give you a proper response, I think I would have to look at it more, think about it more, come up with a polemic against it or for it. If I was convinced by it, I don't think there's enough there for me to be convinced by it yet right now. And that that's where I'm kind of at. So
yeah, well, but for me, I think it's just is it moral for, like, would it be moral for a parent to make their child go through like some kind of trial, knowing, let's say that knowing for a fact that the child will not learn from it and will not improve? Like, I absolutely think it's moral for God to make us go through that if we develop and come out strong in the end, right? That's where I think the whole purpose of suffering is. But for people who God knows are damned and knows will not accept him freely, is it moral for God to like make them go through the sufferings on earth anyway, knowing that this is not going to ultimately lead to anything good on their part, maybe on the part of someone else, but making them victims of that?
Yeah, first I'd have to accept that to be the case. I don't think that is the case, right? I think there is a reason for it, and I do think that, I think he does put people through things, and I think no matter what level of learning they learned, what ultimately makes them better anyway. Also, I have to take into consideration the responsibility aspect. I do put my kids through things. I make them do things that they have a choice to respond or not to respond, but they got to be, either that responsibility is ultimately forced upon them, or that there's a lot there to deal with, is whether boundaries or what, but sometimes I do make them go through things,
Right, but you
and
wouldn't
it's
make
up to
them
them
go
to
through
learn.
but you wouldn't make them go through something that you knew wouldn't be profitable in the end, right?
But I think everything I put them through is profitable.
Yeah, but right, that's true,
Right.
but that doesn't work in the case of the damned, because God knows that it won't be profitable for them.
I
For them.
disagree. I think whatever they go through in this life is profitable for them in some way, shape, or form, because it's part of the experience of life. So
Yeah, but
just
how?
experiencing life on a fundamental scale is a profit.
Oh, I don't think that's no, but I don't think that's true, because then you could say that if God creates people who are only there to be tortured, let's just say God creates a world in which people were tortured, they still have life, they still have experience, but it's always experience of pain. I don't think it'd be a better world. You wouldn't say, well, it's great that they
I'm not.
exist and that's all that matters, right?
Yeah, well, no, I wouldn't say that. I would say that their existence and stuff like that is profitable. What the degree of profitability does is contingent
Yeah,
upon what they would face,
right.
obviously. So yeah, do I think that their existence in and of itself is profitable? Absolutely. What scale is that profitability? You know, so
Right.
I'm not looking at it as an agent that's just sitting there getting tortured and screaming. There's other things going on there. There's a
Mhm.
nature of reality that they're experiencing that does actually have um profitability in it. So even pain somewhat is profitable, because it tells you that something's wrong. So I mean, it, there's a lot to it. There's so many layers that you could dive into there. And is it a better world? I would say that that's not the that's not the world we have. So I think we've got a better one off the bat. So I would,
Right.
if I'm dealing with the world that I'm dealing in today, that's where I would kind of be like, you know, yeah, I can understand all these like things that are going on are profitable in no matter what degree. It's just degree of profitability. Profitability, is that even a word? They just make one
Profitability.
up.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to get at that profitability is contingent on the circumstances, and I think you agree with that. And I'm not saying that you think that God's making worlds where people are being tortured. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah,
we agree that that would not
yeah.
be, even if people existed, that would not be a better. It would be better for God to, if God could only create a world where people are always tortured, to not create. Better for to not create. But that's what I'm saying we agree on. So the point is that is contingent on the levels of value and profitability. So we agree on that. But the point of that is that the damned, I think we might disagree there. I think the damned who have to go through the trials of this earth and then not reach the finish line, not get that
Oh.
ultimate fruition from it, it is ultimately pointless because it doesn't amount to anything.
I think it does, though. I mean, they were given the experience to have love. They were given the experience to learn what relationship was. They were given the experience to grow and have profit in some way, shape, or form. So there is a level there, and how it's experienced, I think, is different, obviously, but
But do you agree that in this like amnesiac thought experiment, to where, like, let's say you've seen the movie Groundhog Day, right, with Bill
right,
Murray?
right.
Let's say that you live in that world every day, but the difference in that is that you literally wipe your memories wiped every single day, and so you wake up, you do this, and sometimes you want to live for yourself and live it up, and sometimes you want to help others, but every day it reverses back and everything goes back to the way it was. Would that world be more or less valuable than a world in which people can actually grow and develop and like remember things, or is it better for a world where like everything is wiped out and ultimately goes back to square one, in that way?
Depends on the day. I think maybe day one is extremely more profitable than day two. You
Right,
know?
but if you could, but if you could choose between having this set of days to where you either give me
Mm.
the world where this is happening every day and it reverses back, or a world where you do keep your memories and the days progress like normal, right? And you're not stuck in the same day. Which of those two worlds is more valuable?
It depends. Depends
Does
on
it?
the way I look at it. Absolutely, because in the first day, in the first world, I'll be alive every day to experience everything anew. I won't have the regret, the baggage that I have.
But you also won't have the
Mistakes
good,
won't matter because I'll just get wiped out and start over.
yeah, but
You
the
know,
good things won't matter either, right?
but of course they will. Of course they will,
How
because I enjoy those. And not only do I enjoy those, but I mean, we'd also, I think it would still be good to go through those things, to experience those things,
so,
right?
so this is a very weird view to me in terms of like, okay, so if pain doesn't matter in this world because it's wiped away the next day, I won't remember it, so it doesn't matter if I'm in pain. But happiness does, because even though I won't remember that I was happy the previous day and that's wiped away, that the experience of that is inherently good, but the experience of the pain wasn't inherently bad. Like I don't think you can have it both ways.
Yeah, you see, because I don't think pain is inherently a bad thing. I think it's different than bad and evil and stuff like that. I don't equate the two. So, where like some pain I think is very necessary for me to experience, um, and it's actually good for me to experience.
If it leads to
Yeah,
something, yeah. If it leads to something.
yeah. Well, it always does, So I mean, it's on itself. I think it's kind of like, you hear the story of the girl that she has no pain receptors, right?
Yeah.
Right. So she doesn't experience that pain, right? So like her putting a hand on the stove, she's not going to feel it burn, right? But it's
Mhm.
still bad that she got burnt, you know.
So it's still
But
harming her body. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, so there's a lot with it. I don't equate harm and all that stuff. I don't put them on the equal level, because I think if you reduce something like bad, if you reduce bad to just pain, then why are we calling pain bad? It should be just pain at that point. You can't
Well,
reduce it
it's
that
not,
way.
and it's not
And that's
just.
that's what GE Moore proposed anyway.
Yeah, it's not just pain. I mean, like certainly I'm, as
Yeah,
someone who advocates for soul making, I think there absolutely are pains you can go
course.
through that have a greater good. I'm not denying that. But I think if in a world where you just get inflicted with pain and there's literally no purpose behind it, I don't think that would be an inherently valuable thing. If you can learn from it, if you can grow, and I know that's what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I'm saying
I'm saying it's impossible not to.
well, but maybe in the moment, but I'm saying the Groundhog Day example, you're not ultimately doing it. It's being erased from you every day. All
Yeah,
the
but I get to go
experiences.
through a brand new experience over and over again.
So you disagree? So in
So
the
it could be that type of world could be a better world to live in, depending on who you are.
but that's not that's not the world we live in, to where like you don't think that God, it's better for God to create a world where every action we do, our memories are wiped and we start and we do it again. So where I can choose between good or bad. I choose good. Okay, start over. Good or bad. And it's random. Like there's no predication. Whereas in the world we live in, I have a moral character to where I can predict. I do have free will, but we become persons, right? Like I have the free will to go and drive to Canada right now, but even though I can do that, doesn't mean just knowing who I am as a person, we can be very highly probable that I'm not going to do that, right? And I can know that although I have the free
You're
will
not
to
going to
not,
drink milk out of a bag.
yeah, yeah. Although I have the free will to not save my mom if she was choking, knowing who I am and what I value, I absolutely would. I'm very confident that I would do that. Like it's far more probable. It's not like everything is a 50-50 probability in terms of will he do good, will he do bad, right? That's obviously not the world we live in. So I'm saying that our free choices build onto our character, and that requires this kind of sequacity, this sequence. It's not just that every action is independent. And I'm saying in this Groundhog Day world, you do ultimately get that, because although they might be sequastic in the day, it does get started over. And so I'm saying if we take that and then stretch it out for 70 years on this earth, that doesn't seem any better. And it seems equally as arbitrary as doing it for a day. Like at what point is it not arbitrary where we draw the line at that point, right? So I'm saying the only model that makes sense to me is one where it's eternally building on and progressing.
I get it. Yeah, I get it. I'm just saying that I would disagree. That entails. I would say I disagree. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. I would disagree that that's the only consideration. You know what I mean? To somebody like David Johnson, right? That said he would rather live in an illusion and be hooked up to the Matrix, right? Basically, I mean, you'll get a different response from different people. So I don't know if that's really objectively true or not. So
David, once you guys are up, I
anyways.
have a question about a totally different topic, but I'll wait for you guys to finish.
We can
No,
move
we're
on to a
done.
different topic.
Yeah. We're just shooting the breeze. That's how me and Caleb do it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, I want to ask you guys. So, eventually, I'm kind of halfway done my series, but eventually, I want to get back to finish off my hiddenness of God argument for atheism because that's part of my existence of God series. And one thing that's interesting is that one response that the theists can give is they can say, well, look, people like J.L. Schellenberg and these atheists advancing the argument are making a mistake. They think that propositional belief that that person exists is necessary to have a relationship with someone. And I've heard counters from some famous philosophers, and they'll say, no, you don't need belief that the person exists in order to have a relationship with them. And they'll give like examples of online relationships where you're not sure if that person's even real, but yet you for years you have an online relationship. You're talking with them, and then let's say finally after 2 years you meet them in person. Oh, you are a real person. I never really believed you were real that whole time. I thought I was talking to a chat bot this whole time. It wouldn't make sense. Well, during that 2 years, no, you obviously had a relationship with them. So I just want to turn it to you guys. Do you guys think that belief is a necessary prerequisite? Belief in the existence of the other person is necessary to have a relationship with them, or I don't know if that's an interesting topic or not, but
I Caleb Johnson can answer this first if he wants because he hasn't said anything in a while.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I don't know. I honestly have not considered that. I would think that from a purely personal sense, yes, you would have to have some degree of belief that that person does exist. But again, that's kind of my purely personal off the cuff answer.
My inclination is to also agree, and I think that if I remember correctly, Schellenberg gives examples like a parent who's hiding from a child. Like if your dad left you for 20 years, and even if he was eventually to meet up with you, like even if we could concede that you could have a relationship, isn't the question of value? Is it better to have a relationship with someone directly, or is it better to have it indirectly? Like if God has the ability to make it more direct, and that would be and that would bring more value to it, then wouldn't God be obligated to bring about that if it's a more valuable state of affairs? Now you could question, is that the more valuable state of affairs, right? So I think it depends on the context of, like, is it better for God to stay hidden for maybe potentially good reasons, or is it even if they could have a relationship without knowing him, like is God still depriving them of the better good by not doing that sooner? Are they missing out on that? So I guess you could say that, but I don't know. I think that's an interesting. I do think Schellenberg's argument's really interesting. I think I would just my go-to on that is just to say that I think that there's no way that it's difficult to establish that someone's a non-resistant non-believer even by like their own testimony, because I think that if you're going to grant that most people in the world who are religious are just honestly mistaken, they're not like lying, but they just fool themselves because of wishful thinking or whatever, I don't see how we can't rule that as a possibility for a smaller group of people who think that they are non-resistant non-believers. So I just feel like any argument you make for non-resistant non-belief, you can make for people sincerely believing in God. And so you're going to have to pick one side of one of these groups is wrong, since maybe sincerely mistaken, but still wrong. So I just think it's hard to establish the non-resistant non-believer premise to my mind.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks.
Gur, we do not know. I sent him text after text. I'm trying to get a hold of him. I'm not sure. Maybe he thought it was a Saturday and not a Friday. So that's the only thing I can think of right now. Because I know Danny, he likes to show up and talk and stuff like that. So and I
He
know he's
found
down
out you're a heretic, and he's like, I don't want to.
Well, at least I don't drink out of a bag of milk.
You got
Mic dropped.
Right.
one thing Teddy was making fun of me is because I was trying to show off. I'm like, well, we've got Reed's Dairy up in Belleville, Ontario here, and it's the best ice cream you've ever had or whatever. Of course, leave it to Teddy. She finds the loony shakes and it's like, you guys are all loonies.
Here's a random question, Dale, that's not related. Before we get back to that, is I was reading on a Reddit forum, like of well, not reading, it was one of the videos where it's a compilation, but they were asking like people who don't live in the U.S. what is like a giveaway or like a debt where you can tell just by looking at them or by behavior that someone is from America, either by mannerisms or like way they act. Like in Canada, could you spot like in a group of people like which one you think the American is? Like, would there be like a tell? Would there be kind of a giveaway?
Apparently,
what would that be?
Apparently there is, but I'll admit, like for me personally, I'm horrible at that stuff. Like I don't care. People are just people. Like I'm not trying to like where did you come from or like I can't tell. Yeah, like I think apparently obviously a dead giveaway if people have an accent or they say y'all or something like that. I can tell.
Y'all. I've heard Canadians say y'all, and it makes me turn my head a little bit, but.
Really?
For me, it's when Canadians say about like a boot or something like that. They have a slight accent like that, and it's like, oh, everything you said was normal, and then you just had that one word, and it was like, oh, there it is.
Yeah, see, nobody in Canada talks like that except for Newfies, like in Newfoundland. But sometimes I've done that as a joke. I'm like, like what are you talking about, or something like that.
It's not that thick. It can be a little bit more subtle. How do you say it normally? Just how do you
about?
Okay, so but I don't know if you're consciously doing that because of the context or like, is that how you say it normally?
That's just how I normally talk.
Okay. Okay. I know Canadians who like don't have an accent, but like that one word is like, that'll give it away, but everything else you wouldn't be able to tell. So I don't know if it's just
we have weird words and stuff like that you guys don't. Like obviously instead of beanie, you guys call it a beanie, we call it a toque. Or like there are differences like that, but other than that, I think I sound like an American.
Apparently, Americans talk louder as well, but I don't know if that's and smile more a bit. But then again, like
you haven't been on the TTC, so that's our bus service.
There was one guy who said that Americans like lean up against things when they're talking, and that's not normal in other parts of the world. They're like lean, you know what I'm saying? Like you'll lean against a table or like a wall or something if you're staying there for a while, and like apparently that's not normal in a lot of other countries. So.
Yeah, I'll tell you the one thing that is such a stereotype, but it's actually true, and you guys will get a laugh out of this, but it's apologizing, saying sorry kind of thing. Okay, Caleb's got to go, but I do, even when we do nothing wrong, nice talking to you, Caleb, we'll say sorry, and Caleb, I'm sorry for talking about this when you were going to go, but
no,
you just said sorry. You just said sorry.
All right, buddy. We'll see ya.
We actually enacted a law because the problem was so bad that it's called the Apology Act, whereby you are allowed to say sorry in a court of law without incurring guilt. Because apparently Americans, they won't say sorry, or that means you're guilty. But we had to pass an act where it's like we say sorry, but that's not us admitting that we're guilty or something in a court. So I don't know. I found that funny.
See, David, doesn't he when he says sorry, doesn't he have an accent that you're saying sorry?
Me, sorry?
Yeah,
no, I say sorry.
No, Dale, say sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, when you said it earlier, it was like sorry, like it was slight there, but I think it was there. So I think that was maybe I'm just being more hyper fixed on it now, but I'm pretty sure you said it with a slight accent. But
for the most part, I say sorry, kind of thing.
Yeah, you just said it.
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
You say sorry. We in the sorry. Open the sorry.
Yeah,
sorry. If you say it fast, it's hard to tell, but I think you have I think it's slightly there, Dale. I think you're giving it away there.
Oh no. You said that I'm a newfie.
Yeah.
Go drink some milk out of a bag. You'll be fine.
Well, hey, that's not as bad as the canned cheese that we have, the spray cheese. I think that's probably worse than bagged milk, to be honest, David.
That and Spam.
Yeah, and spam. Spam's like
Dude,
mostly
I'll
Hawaii.
tell you
though.
what. I went to Costco today, and they totally had like hot spam on a Hawaiian roll, sweet
Ew.
roll, a sweet Hawaiian roll, and I definitely tried it, and it was actually pretty freaking good.
I know that Hawaiians love spam, but that's
Well, that Hawaiian sweet roll is actually pretty good. I have to give them credit.
Other ones are another giveaway is if they say something that's like the metric system where it's like Celsius or they'll say kilometers or something like that, and you're like, oh, that's
true, but Canada's weird, right? Like for some things, we still use inches and feet and stuff. Like especially the older generation, like my parents, they know that more than centimeters and meters and stuff. But like, so for some things, like with haircuts, for example, I would take off 10 centimeters. We don't do that. We take off like a couple inches or something like that, or so we're weird. We're in between. I don't know what's up.
I've said centimeters at a haircut before, though, but just take off a few because like inches is too much. Or it's like just take off like a few centimeters. Like I couldn't quantitate it, but I just know the range of like about how much I want, right? So yeah, that's probably easier. But I very rarely say meters or like kilometers or grams. Typically, it's
for us, it's all kilometers. Like speed limits are kilometers per hour. I remember I rented an American car, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I had to pay attention, like what speed am I going, and stuff like that. So
do you all drive on the right side of the road or left?
On the right side, of course.
Okay. Yeah. So you're not Brits, at least. It's not. Yeah.
No, that was just insane. Yeah.
Do you all? I'm trying to think of what other words, because I know like in Britain, Australia, they have different words for different things. What do you call the? Well, no, I don't think Canada has differences. Like in terms of like, do you just say cotton candy? Is that what you call that there?
Cotton candy, yeah.
Yeah, because in Britain it's called candy floss, which I guess makes sense because it looks like floss, and in Australia it's called fairy floss, which is kind of fun.
Interesting.
And I know in Britain an elevator is called a lift, which also like makes sense. Yeah, thank you. He definitely said sorry. Yeah, thank you.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you're in denial. But you need to just embrace it. Just
right.
Next time we do a stream, I want you to dress up as a full Mountie and embrace it. Okay. Like
okay.
Yeah, just
Dudley
Dale,
right?
Yeah. Well, guys, I think we made the best out of this show. We didn't get Danny. We'll have to reschedule him. Usually, like I said, he's not the one to bail. I did have some confirmation also from Titan. He was talking about there's thunderstorms in his area that could have knocked out power. So, not sure. Just hope everything's okay with him. We're not. We don't hate on anybody because they missed something. We made the best out of the show. Anyways, with that, guys, next week I think we have an opening next week. So we'll probably come on and try this again with Danny if he wants to. But yeah, other than that, we've got the Shroud show coming up. Dale and Jordan will be debating the Shroud.
Yeah, and I will say
which is going to be awesome.
Thank you, Caleb, because you gave your objection to the medieval part was interesting. So I've never heard about it. I do think it's a good objection, like appealing to God's MO that he doesn't do authenticating miracles in cultures where Christianity is already established. I think I have the rebuttals to it, but I need to work on it. But that was a good objection. I never heard it before. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's just something you come across in like philosophy of miracles in terms of like, what are we looking for and what are we not? And actually, what's funny is that I've thought of that before other people brought it up, but Hugh Ferry, I was asked, this is way back when he was helping me review some of the Catholic stuff. And he had brought up the Eucharist miracles. And I don't know if you read my blog post on Eucharist miracles back probably, I don't know, like 8 months ago now. But I give my concerns there, and that's part of it as well, where I think it's like, okay, but like these are mostly in culture. And Hugh Ferry had asked that question of like, why would God, other than like Lanciano, like in most of these cases, like people already believe. So what's kind of the point, right? In terms of that, or at least it seems like the hypothesis that people are being credulous is better than the idea that God's trying to vindicate a message if the only people who are really perceiving it. Now, granted, the Shroud of Turin is one that's widely studied, right? But I guess it's like if it was like a claim about an Indian guru who did a miracle and the only people who saw it were Hindus that already believed in it, and like no one else had ever heard of this or converted, that to me would be at least some evidence to think there's probably something up.
Do you mind if I just ask you though, because there's an important difference here, right? Like my medieval miracle thought experiment. Look, we're assuming this thing has been proven to be a miracle. That's a given. India. Like,
and
would you
hypothetical.
really reject that evidence just because it's from the medieval period? That's what I think on a balance of probabilities. Maybe there's an issue, but it's at least plausible that no, you should follow the evidence that we have proof this thing's a miracle and we're formed by God.
Well,
Um,
so I think I would take issue with proved it's a miracle, because I would, I mean, you probably would agree that I would take like a Bayesian approach in terms of how do we determine whether something isn't whether something we say it's a miracle versus it's simply an unknown weird phenomenon, right, that we can't replicate. And I think that the background knowledge is relevant to that in terms of the context. And so I think the priors for God healing people, out of mercy is not that low. The probability of God doing a vindication miracle in a culture isn't that low. And so if there's a relevant cultural context, and you could argue for a relevant religious context, but I think it's harder to do it in the Shroud case than maybe for some other ones. But I think the Shroud case would be better than some other ones in like Eastern religions. So it's not like it's the lowest one, right? So
I definitely hear you. I do agree on the prior probability thing, that positing it in the medieval period might slightly lower it, but it's the scientific evidence that we have that it is in fact miraculous, that a posteriori stuff overwhelms anything on that front. So
yeah, it could be, but I think that when you say again is miraculous, I just be like saying like I think demonstrating that something's miraculous has to be an inferential argument in terms of you can demonstrate that it's not explicable by any known natural mechanism, right? But when you're getting to therefore God's the best hypothesis, you do have to throw in some natural theology and some idea of like why is the supernatural agent hypothesis better than than just positing some unknown, we don't know what it is yet, but we might find out, that kind of thing. So I think you can do that in principle, but it just depends on the context. But there are things that I think are weird anomalies that I don't jump to a supernatural conclusion, and I just say I don't know what to think, right? Like,
what do you? Because my argument for the shroud, you personally have seen my criteria for authenticating a religious authenticating miracle event, and again, it doesn't matter whether it's supernatural, natural necessarily, but it fits those criteria. Do you think? So I'm 72% convinced that the images on the shroud fit those criteria. Do you think my criteria are justified in saying, yeah, God did it? That's a miracle. That's a God designed event.
To be honest, I have to look at the criteria again. Yeah, because I don't remember off the top of my head. I know we've talked about it before in that way. Do you want to wrap the show up, Dave? We can talk about this a little bit after the show.
Yeah, it's fine, guys. Let's wrap it. Let everybody go home and do whatever they want to do, or they probably are watching from home, but but yeah, guys. So again, we have the Shroud debate coming up, which is going to be fun. After that, we don't have anything scheduled right off the top of my head. Me and Tyler are definitely going to be working on the gospel documentary, so stay tuned for that. And until then, as Tyler tells us, be safe, God bless, be safe, and stay like Christ.